My mother lifted her champagne glass, smiled at the room, and said clearly, slowly, so no one could miss it. I have 2 daughters. One is successful, the other is basically a beggar. The word hung in the air for half a second. Then the room exploded. Laughter rolled across the table. Glasses clinked. Someone let out a sharp laugh that sounded almost impressed. In that exact moment, I understood something with terrifying clarity. This wasn't a joke that slipped out. This was a label they had been waiting to say out loud. 1 week later, my phone would not stop ringing, and every single call would come from the same people who were laughing right then. Before we go any further, tell me where you're listening from. Are you in the US, somewhere in Europe, or another part of the world? Because what happened next might sound extreme, but it happens quietly in families everywhere. My name is Emily Walker. I'm 29 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. Last Thanksgiving, my family gathered at a luxury resort near Lake Tahoe. The kind of place designed to make people feel important. Stone walls, soft lighting, fireplaces that never stopped burning, staff who refilled your glass before you even noticed it was empty. From the outside, we looked like a perfect American family. Comfortable, educated, successful. That illusion shattered the moment my mother decided to turn dinner into a performance. She stood up without warning, tapping her glass with a fork until the table went quiet. My mother, Margaret Walker, loved having an audience. She loved moments where all eyes were on her. I'm so thankful this year, she began, smiling warmly, especially for my children. She turned first toward my sister. This is Rachel, she said proudly, a high-level executive, disciplined, driven, someone who actually built something real with her life. Rachel smiled politely, the practiced smile of someone who had never needed to fight for approval. Then my mother's eyes shifted to me. And this, she said, laughing lightly, is Emily. She paused just long enough. She's still figuring things out, still drifting. You know, not everyone lands on their feet. A few people chuckled. My father leaned back in his chair, already grinning. My mother lifted her glass again and delivered the line that cut deeper than anything before it. One daughter is a success, the other is basically a beggar. The laughter this time was louder. My father added, "At least she knows how to survive on other people's couches," like it was the punchline of the night. Someone across the table said, "Hey, being a beggar is a lifestyle choice now." Another voice joked, "She's allergic to stability." I felt every eye move toward me, not just my face, but my clothes, my thrift store sweater, my worn sneakers. I suddenly became very aware of how I looked compared to everyone else at that table. Rachel didn't say a word. She stared at her plate. Silence, I realized, was just agreement in a quieter form. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself. Instead, I reached under my sweater and wrapped my fingers around the small silver necklace resting against my chest. It had belonged to my grandmother. She was the only person in my life who had never measured my worth by titles or paychecks. My chair scraped softly as I stood. No one stopped laughing. No one followed me. No one even said my name. I walked out of that dining room, past the fireplace, past the polished smiles, and into the cold Tahoe air. The door closed behind me, cutting off the sound of laughter like a switch being flipped. I sat in my car for a long time before turning the engine on. My hands were steady, but my chest felt hollow, not broken, empty, like something had finally been taken instead of borrowed. On the drive back to Portland, every mile replayed the same thought in my head. Beggar. That's what they saw. That's what they believed. That's the story they told about me. What they didn't know, what none of them knew sitting at that table, was that their lives looked stable because someone they called a beggar had been holding everything together. And the moment I stopped doing that, their perfect world began to crack. But that part of the story hadn't reached them yet. All they knew was that a beggar had stood up, walked away, and didn't look back. And sometimes, that's the most dangerous thing of all. Growing up, I learned early how families decide who is worth listening to and who is not. In ours, the roles were assigned quietly and never questioned. Rachel was the golden child. Straight A's, debate trophies, internships that turned into job offers before graduation. People leaned in when she spoke. My parents listened to her opinions as if they were already proven facts. When relatives visited, her achievements were introduced before dessert. Mark, my older brother, followed right behind her in a different way. He wasn't academic like Rachel, but my father took him everywhere. Business lunches, networking events, long car rides filled with advice about leadership, leverage, and money. Mark was the son who was learning the real world, the one being prepared. And then there was me. I was the kid who took apart old laptops just to see how they worked, the one who filled notebooks with interface sketches instead of math notes. I spent hours watching tutorials, teaching myself design software, learning how code behaved when you pushed it too far. I didn't know how to explain what I loved in a way that sounded respectable, so to them, it never did. Whenever I tried, the same phrases came back at me, polished and dismissive. You should get a real job. That's not a career. You can't build a future on random ideas. They said it kindly sometimes, sharply other times, but the message never changed. What I cared about was temporary. What I believed in was unstable. And I, by extension, was unreliable. At family dinners, Rachel talked about quarterly reports and promotions. Mark discussed projections and partnerships. When the conversation turned to me, my mother would smile tightly and say, "Emily's still figuring things out," as if I weren't sitting right there. My father liked to add, "Some people take longer to grow up." I learned to laugh along. I learned to stay quiet. I learned that defending myself only made things worse, because explanations sounded like excuses when no one wanted to understand you in the first place. What none of them saw was how focused I actually was. After college, while they assumed I was drifting, I was spending my nights in a small co-working space in downtown Portland, surrounded by flickering lights and the hum of other people chasing ideas no one else believed in yet. I was broke in the way that comes with purpose, not confusion. I lived cheaply, worked obsessively, and built things piece by piece. I didn't talk about it at home because I already knew how it would land. My mother would worry. My father would shake his head. Rachel would suggest something more stable. Mark would joke about side hustles. So I stopped sharing altogether. There was a strange safety in being underestimated. The truth, which I kept carefully folded away, was that I was building a financial tech platform for freelancers, people who lived with unpredictable income and constant anxiety about bills, taxes, and timing. I understood them because I was one of them. I designed the system the way I wished my own life felt, organized, clear, and resilient, even when things went wrong. Every feature came from a problem I had lived. Every solution was tested on myself first. I worked weekends. I worked holidays. I worked through exhaustion because momentum mattered more than comfort. When something broke, I fixed it. When I didn't know an answer, I learned it. Progress was slow, then suddenly faster than I expected, but I kept that to myself too. At family gatherings, I still wore the label they had given me. The one who hadn't landed. The one who needed time. The one whose life was a cautionary tale. Part of me hoped that one day, if I just kept going quietly, they would notice on their own, that they would look closer and realize I wasn't lost, just building something they didn't recognize yet. That hope kept me silent longer than it should have, because when you want approval badly enough, you accept being misunderstood as the cost of staying close. By the time I realized how deeply that silence was shaping the way they treated me, it had already become normal. I was the daughter they worried about, but didn't respect. The one they talked over. The one whose absence from the conversation felt convenient. And the irony, the part that still stings when I think about it, is that while they believed I had no direction, my life had never felt more intentional. I was just invisible to people who had already decided who I was supposed to be. There was a version of my family's life that everyone saw, and then there was the version that only I knew, because I was the one quietly holding it together. It started small, almost harmless, the way most dangerous habits do. A late-night call from Mark, his voice tight, trying to sound casual. He told me there had been an issue with the gym's plumbing, a burst pipe that flooded the front studio. Insurance would cover part of it, he said, but not all, and the timing couldn't have been worse because a loan payment was coming due. He laughed nervously and said, "I'll figure it out," the same way he always did when he didn't have a plan. I did not offer help out loud. I just went home, opened my laptop, and looked at the numbers. I adjusted a few settings, rerouted some income, and made sure the payment cleared before penalties kicked in. Mark never knew how close he'd been to defaulting. A week later, he was telling people the business had bounced back because he stayed calm under pressure. Not long after that, Rachel mentioned, almost as an aside, that her credit card company had flagged her account. She said it like a minor inconvenience, something she didn't need to think about because it always worked out. Legal fees, nanny costs, rent in a city that never waits for you to catch up. That night, I scheduled a payment that brought her balance down just enough to keep everything quiet. The alert disappeared. The problem vanished. Rachel called it good timing. My parents were the most careful with their words and the most fragile with their finances. Medical bills arrived without warning. The mortgage hovered too close to late more times than they admitted. My mother clipped coupons again and pretended it was a hobby. My father joked about staying home more to save gas. They told relatives they were fine. They told themselves the same thing. They never saw the notifications that popped up on my screen. I had built my platform to protect freelancers from chaos, but at some point, without fully admitting it to myself, I turned it into something else. Inside my dashboard, there was a folder I never talked about, labeled simply family. Each name sat in its own column, everyone tied to a rule, every rule tied to my income. When Mark's revenue dipped below a certain line, the system stepped in. When Rachel's card crept toward danger, the balance dropped. When my parents' account stalled, money moved before anyone noticed. It felt responsible at first, then necessary, then automatic. Years passed that way, with my life split neatly down the middle. On the surface, I was still the daughter who had not landed, still the one whose career made my parents uneasy. Underneath, I was the reason their lives looked stable enough to joke about. I tracked everything, not because I planned to confront anyone, but because numbers don't lie when people do. Every transfer, every late fee avoided, every quiet rescue sat there in clean lines and neutral colors. When I finally added it all up, the total made my chest tighten. More than $350,000 spread across years, moments, emergencies no one ever called by that name. The strangest part was how normal it felt to carry that weight while being treated like a problem. My family called it luck. They said things like, "The bank gave us a break," or "Things just worked out somehow." When my mother wore a new jacket to a holiday dinner, she never questioned why her card still worked. When Mark reopened his flooded studio, he talked about resilience. When Rachel ordered another glass of wine without checking the bill, she called it confidence. And I sat there, smiling, listening, swallowing the quiet knowledge that none of it would have happened without me. I told myself I was doing the right thing. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that one day, when things were calmer, I would explain, and they would finally see me differently. What I did not admit was the cost. Every time they joked about me being unstable, it landed heavier, because I knew how stable they actually were, only because I made it so. Every time someone hinted that I was drifting, I felt something twist inside me, because I was working harder than anyone at that table. Every time they called me a burden, I paid another bill to keep the peace. By the time we arrived at that resort near Lake Tahoe, the system had been running quietly for years, doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect, absorb, stabilize. So when my mother laughed and called me a beggar in front of everyone, it did not just hurt my pride. It exposed a truth I could no longer ignore. I was bleeding myself dry to maintain a version of family that only existed because I kept feeding it. I was preserving an image that required me to stay small, silent, and grateful. Sitting alone that night, the numbers still fresh in my mind, I finally understood something I had been avoiding for a long time. I was not helping them because they respected me. I was helping them because I hoped they eventually would. And that realization changed everything. I did not confront anyone. I did not send a long message or demand an apology. I did not announce a boundary or explain myself. I did the quietest thing possible, which turned out to be the loudest choice of my life. Late one night, sitting alone at my kitchen table, I opened my laptop and logged into the system I had built. The dashboard looked the same as it always did, calm and orderly, lines of numbers resting in green and yellow, as if nothing could ever go wrong. I scrolled through the rules I had written over the years, each one designed to step in before panic had a chance to surface. I hovered over the first switch longer than I expected. My hand did not shake, but my chest felt tight, like I was standing at the edge of something I could not undo. Then I clicked. One by one, I turned them off. The automatic transfers, the emergency buffers, the quiet corrections that had kept everything upright. I did not delete any records. I did not change passwords. I simply removed myself from the equation. When I closed my laptop, the apartment was silent. No dramatic music, no sense of triumph, just a strange, unfamiliar stillness. For the first time in years, there was nothing scheduled to fix anyone else's problems. The consequences came faster than I thought they would. The next morning, my phone buzzed while I was brushing my teeth. A message from my mother, short and confused. "My card just got declined at the cafe. Is there something wrong with the bank?" I stared at the screen, foam dripping into the sink, and felt a sharp twist of recognition. That card had never declined before, not once. I did not answer. An hour later, another message arrived. Then a missed call. Then another text. This one edged with irritation. "This is weird. We've never had issues like this." By noon, the tone had shifted. My father called, his voice tight and impatient. "Do you know why our mortgage account is suddenly under review? The bank says a payment didn't go through. That doesn't just happen." I leaned back against the counter and closed my eyes. For years, those payments had gone through because I made sure they did. Now, without the invisible correction, reality had finally caught up. "I'm not sure," I said evenly. "You should ask the bank." There was a pause on the line, heavy with suspicion. "Did you change something?" There it was. The assumption that if something broke, it must have been me. Before I could respond, another call came in. Then another. Messages stacked on top of each other until my phone felt heavier in my hand. Rachel texted screenshots of emails from her credit card company, subject lines screaming about account reviews and temporary restrictions. "This can't be happening," she wrote. "Everything was set up. Did you mess with anything when you were here last?" Mess with anything. As if I had been a careless guest, instead of the person quietly keeping her from financial freefall. By the end of the day, my family group chat had turned into chaos. Questions overlapped. Accusations crept in between pleas for help. Mark called late in the evening, his voice sharper than I had ever heard it. "The gym's landlord is asking questions," he said. "This timing is suspicious, Emily. All of this started after Tahoe." I sat on the edge of my bed, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the frustration in his voice, and felt something shift inside me. Not guilt, not anger. Relief. For the first time, their problems were actually theirs. They cycled through every emotion, often within the same message. Confusion turned into panic. Panic into blame. Blame into bargaining. "Just tell us what's going on," my mother pleaded in a voicemail, her voice smaller than I was used to hearing. "We know we were wrong at dinner. We were joking. Please call us back." I listened to that message twice. Once as a daughter. Once as someone who finally understood the cost of always smoothing things over. Being just joking had never stopped them before. It had only stopped me from protecting myself. They wanted answers. They wanted me to fix it. They wanted things to go back to normal, which meant I stepped in quietly and made the noise disappear. I did none of those things. Each unanswered call felt like a small act of rebellion and a massive act of self-preservation. My hands still shook sometimes when the phone lit up again, but I did not move. I went to work. I cooked dinner. I slept through the night without checking balances or adjusting rules. Watching the power dynamic reverse was disorienting. The people who had always spoken with certainty now sounded unsure. The ones who laughed at my instability were unraveling without a safety net they never knew existed. And for the first time, I understood something with painful clarity. Silence was no longer weakness. Distance was no longer abandonment. Letting consequences land was not cruelty. It was honesty. I had spent years preventing discomfort that was never meant to be mine. Now, as the ripple effects spread outward, I stayed still and let the truth surface on its own. The final meeting happened in a place my family had never imagined when they talked about my life. My office sat on the third floor of a renovated brick building in Portland, with tall windows, whiteboards covered in diagrams, and desks that didn't match but worked perfectly. It wasn't flashy. It was real. It was mine. I arrived early and stood by the window for a moment, watching cars move below, steady and indifferent, reminding myself to breathe. They came together, stiff and guarded. My parents walked in first, shoulders close, as if bracing for impact. Mark followed, arms crossed, jaw tight. Rachel came last, dressed like she was walking into court, her expression controlled but restless. No one spoke at first. The silence felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. I didn't waste time. I connected my laptop to the screen and turned it toward them. The dashboard filled the wall with clean lines and neutral colors. Names, dates, transfers, Totals. I let it sit there for a moment before I spoke. This, I said calmly, is what you never saw. My father leaned forward. My mother's hand went to her mouth. Mark squinted, recognition flickering in his eyes. Rachel stood up without realizing it, stepping closer to the screen as if proximity could change the numbers. I walked them through it slowly. The emergency payments, the automated rules, the money that moved when their accounts dipped too low. I didn't accuse, I didn't raise my voice, I just explained. When I reached the total, I paused long enough for it to sink in. More than $350,000. The room went quiet in a way that felt fragile, like glass about to crack. My mother started crying first, not loudly, just enough to be heard. My father sat back, staring at the screen, his hands resting uselessly on his knees. Mark shook his head, muttering that it didn't make sense, that someone would have said something. Rachel was the only one who didn't look away. So this company, she said carefully, choosing her words like weapons. You built it using information we shared, our financial data, our situations. That means we're connected to it. There it was. The moment I knew had always been coming. You're saying, I replied evenly, that because I used my own income to help you, you deserve a claim on the company that made that possible. She didn't deny it. We're family, she said. You didn't do this alone. I felt something settle inside me then, not anger, not fear, but clarity. I closed my laptop and faced them. I did this alone, I said. I worked nights, I took risks, I paid the bills, I carried the pressure. You benefited from the results, but you did not build this, and you don't get to own what you never believed in. Mark opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. My father finally spoke, his voice rough. So what now? You just walk away and let everything fall apart? No, I said. I walk forward. I laid out the boundaries clearly, without negotiation. There would be no more automatic payments, no more silent rescues. If they wanted help, it would be advice, not money. Conversations, not demands. Everything transparent, everything respectful, or nothing at all. No one clapped, no one hugged. This wasn't a movie ending. My mother apologized, quietly, imperfectly. My father admitted he hadn't wanted to see the truth because it challenged the story he'd told himself for years. Mark said nothing, but he listened. Rachel looked defeated, not because she'd lost something, but because she'd been exposed. When they left, the office felt larger, lighter. In the weeks that followed, my life changed in small, meaningful ways. I slept better. I stopped checking my phone every few minutes. I invested my time where it was returned, not drained. I learned that distance can be an act of love for yourself, even when it disappoints others. Family, I realized, is not the place where you disappear to keep peace. It's the place where you are allowed to exist without shrinking. And if that place doesn't exist, you're allowed to build one somewhere else. If you listened to this story from beginning to end, tell me in the comments whether it resonated with you. Did you like it? And what kind of stories should I tell next? If you want to hear more real stories from women who found their strength after being underestimated, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.